My name is Brian. I'm going to do a short video today on how to chemically weld 3D printed parts together. It's how you would make a large piece that couldn't fit on your printer out of separate individually printed pieces. Um, you might be wondering what I mean by chemically welding. In this case, we're going to literally melt the pieces together. So we're going to have a little bit of sacrificial material that's applied to, and we're going to use a solvent to dissolve the plastic in the two adjoining pieces so that they melt into each other. So it is very much like if you're familiar with metal welding. It's a very similar thing. We're going to literally melt the edge between the two pieces into each other to form one basically large contiguous piece. Now, why do you use 3D or, the chemical welding as opposed to just gluing the parts together? For starters, a lot of plastics that we print don't glue particularly well, so you're not going to get a really strong bond. Now, if you get a strong enough bond for what you're doing, by all means, just glue the parts together. It's probably easier. However, if you really need a really strong, basically a single piece part, chemical welding is going to provide a really strong joint. In fact, in my experience, if you do it correctly, the weld will be stronger than the 3D printed part. Another advantage of the chemical welding is because if you use you know the leftover free material from your print when you're building the sacrificial material, which we're going to very confusingly call glue, but I'll talk about that later, then you're going to get a color that's absolutely identical to the rest of the part. Now the sheen's going to be a little different because this is going to have been basically kind of a liquid for a little bit, right? So it's going to be very smooth, whereas you would have had a coarser finish on the 3D printed filament, but the color will be pretty darn exact. So that is another advantage, I suppose, if you care about those things. In my case, I want an absolutely ridiculously strong part because in my case, I'm gluing together some parts for a remote control warship hull that's going to be hopefully used in Big Gun's RC warship combat. The boats actually have auto reloading cannons and fire steel ball bearings at each other. So this boat's going to take a fair bit of abuse. And I don't want the first time it sinks to split in two like Titanic and break into individual pieces. So I need it to be a really strong connection. This video isn't going to talk about the safety concerns and stuff. I'm responsible for my safety, and you're responsible for yours. I'll also say that I'm not. I'm new to recording videos, and I'm not particularly good at it. and so I'm probably going to cut some corners just because I got to be able to fit the things in frame, and I'm still figuring out how to do all that. So please research the safety of the materials you're using and do what you need to do. At an absolute minimum, please have good ventilation. Ideally, do the stuff outside. Some of these plastics, ABS, like I'm working with today, the fumes are toxic. You really do not need to be breathing this stuff in. So, please take care of that. Also, we're using solvents that'll melt plastics, right? So, some gloves, not a bad idea. But once again, I'm not going to talk about the safety beyond that. It's up to you to be responsible for your own safety. And with that, we'll start talking about how I do this. And just as a quick overview, the general process is obviously we'll talk about making the sacrificial material, which we'll talk about more here in a minute. How you mix that up. We'll also talk about how you prep the parts so that they'll align correctly. When you're working, because one of the downsides of the chemical welding is you have to work pretty fast. That they start bonding really, really quick. So you only have, very few seconds when you push the pieces together to put them where they need to be. So you have to be ready for that, and preparation is a big part of that. The bonding material we're going to use today is often called ABS glue, and I know I just a minute ago said we're not using glue. That's not my term. I'm using that term because if you go searching for more videos or written tutorials on it, that's what other people are going to call it. Basically, what you're doing is you're taking some of the tree support material, leftover material from your print, and you're going to dissolve it in a solvent. There's no reason this has to be acetone and ABS. I think the same technique would work with other plastics and solvents. these terms aren't my terms, and they're used in other people's videos and blog posts. But the terms I see the most are uh, ABS slurry, ABS glue, and I think it was ABS wash was the other one. And they're just different thicknesses of the mixture, like what the ratio of the solvent to the plastic is. In my case today, I want kind of a middle of the road density or thickness to the material. And I'll show some video here in a second, mixing it up. But the consistency we're trying for is kind of like a wood glue. You want something that's going to flow pretty well. The only purpose of this is basically to fit in between the little fibers, the little filament fibers from your print, to basically spread the solvent around so everything melts nice and evenly. Plastic that's going in this mixture is almost just a carrier for it, just to make sure that it gets in all the places. It does provide some benefit of it'll fill the voids and stuff, but we're not really trying to build up the material here. We're just trying to make sure the acetone gets spread everywhere and melts really evenly together. So that's the real purpose of this. And let me go through showing you how to mix this up. It's relatively easy, but I think, picture's worth 1,000 words, so video is probably worth 10,000, right? So let's go ahead and mix some up real quick. Unfortunately, the video I originally recorded of making the ABS glue didn't actually record. And like I said, I'm new to all this, rookie mistake. Um, so I'm just going to describe it, and I'm going to show you, what it should look like, and also kind of how to adjust it a little. 'Cause it turns out this has been used now for a couple of hours. It's starting to get a little tough, and so it'll be a good example of showing you what to do if you put too much plastic in your acetone. So you're going to want some small, cheap glass containers, or at least something that the lid and the container will not dissolve in your solvent you're using. They need to be cheap because you're never going to get them clean again. So you got to be willing to throw them out. Stuff has like no shelf life. So it's like you can use it like the day you make it, maybe a day or two after tops. It does not last. So you're going to be throwing this container out, which is also, you don't want to mix a whole lot of it up. Just, mix a little bit up, mix more than you need. You don't want to run out, but um, I always just start with, I usually do about a half of whatever container I'm using with acetone in it. This is the container I've been using for you'll see later in the video, I use just clear acetone on one half of the joint. So that's what I've been using this container for. But um, and then you're just going to take some of your leftover tree material that you took off the print. And it's the same filament that you printed with. So it's going to, it bonds to the other filament, right? Because that's how you printed it. And it's the same exact color. So it's going to, blend in really nice. The only thing you really need to do for prepping this, and I don't even know if you need to do it, I know I do it, is just cut it into smaller pieces just so maximizes the surface area on the acetone for it, and it'll melt a little faster. Okay. Now, I used so this has got this is a 60 milliliter container. I put about 30 milliliters in it. I probably used two or three, maybe three, three pieces about this size in it. And just cut it into small pieces like I'm doing here. And just dropped it into the acetone and shook it up a little. The other thing you'll want to do is to clean one popsicle stick for stirring, or something that, once again, that will not melt in the solvent. It needs to not have any paints or dyes in it that'll melt in the solvent. Otherwise, it's going to dye the glue that you're making. It won't match the parts exactly. So I just use popsicle sticks. They work fine. I think sometimes, like the one you can see, the one from the earlier day, it splits some. Who cares? It splits. Still works. So every once in a while, you're going to want to stir up the mixture. It takes quite a while for it to dissolve. It's probably like an hour or so to dissolve. And I would say that's a good time to probably uh, go ahead and do the pins, and we'll talk about that in the video. Get all the pins installed on your part, get those tacked in while the acetone is dissolving the filament, the three support material. When you're finished, you want to have something about the consistency of wood glue. So, oh, neat. Something. Oh, it's just a reflection of my goggles. I was wondering what got in the glue. So you can see, like, and that's starting to, you can see, and this one's starting to get a little thick, right? It's a little thicker than wood glue. And that's just because it's it's been used all day. And like I said, it still has like no shelf life. So it thickens really fast. And if you overdo it a little, just put, well, I guess I should try to do this the other way so you can see, right? You just want to put that absolute, just smallest amount of acetone in, like very, 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 very little. It's a long ways when it gets to this point. And if you do too much, then you got to add more plastic material in, and you're kind of back and forth, back and forth. You can't do this indefinitely, but you can get away with adding acetone once or twice, and it'll get rid of those clumps, and it'll get it back to the consistency you want. And then just once again, just so you guys can see it really well, see if I can get a little closer. Actually, I guess the focus will probably get soft if I do that. You really just want like a wood glue like consistency, right? This you don't want it to be building up any material. The print's already hopefully dimensionally accurate. You just want something that'll squeeze into all the little crevices and microscopic cracks in between the layers. And most importantly, deliver the acetone to all those places so that the adjacent parts will melt into each other. And that's really all there is to it. And then, like I said, once you've put a bunch of the material in, it's going to take a good while for it to dissolve. So you should immediately probably just start going ahead and tacking the pins in to the one side of each of the joints. So we'll cover that next. We want to actually be able to line these parts up really, really quickly. And you can see, these are kind of complicated shapes. So you want to make sure all these little edges end up lining up. So in my opinion, you really absolutely have to put some extra holes in the slice. See if you can see this here. Um, right? I guess this one shows up a little better. Um, so you can see so ignore these holes here. That's for something in the boat. You have these holes on this cross brace. But look at these. I've got these extra holes around the perimeter. And you can do this in the slicer. In my case, I did it in the CAD model when I was designing the part. But you want to have a place that you can just throw a couple of, I don't know if the camera will pick this up or not, right? Just want a couple of little, where's the focus? I don't know. Couple little alignment pins. The other thing about these is you're going to want them to be able to be, you want to test fit all this stuff. So go ahead and clean everything up, and take your printed pins, get them so that they'll fit good, and they'll slide right in. That's kind of the first step to this. And I've already taken a file off camera and just taken off, and in case I printed these with brims because it's ABS, and I was a little paranoid that uh, they wouldn't stick to the build plate. So I went ahead and I filed off the brims, and I've got these so that they come off pretty quick. Well, really more to the point, go in pretty quick. Then what we're going to do is we're going to weld these in. Now keep in mind, if you have here's the two halves. Only one side needs the pins, right? Because the pins are going to fit in the hole on the other side. So now we're going to kind of tack weld these in. We're not really trying to get them permanently welded in. We're going to do it really, just really quick. And I'll show you that here in a sec. Let me throw some gloves on. Gloves. So, also going to need a little bit of just pure acetone. We're not going to use the glue for this. This is really just trying to get a nice clean joint that doesn't have anything blocking around the pins. So if you'd used glue, you would have ended up with just a little bit of like where it's squeezed out and it wouldn't allow a flush joint later. We just wanted to do just a little, just enough to tack these into place. We're just going to take, I've got a little bit of acetone in here. I'm using an acid brush. Don't use your kids' craft brushes. They'll melt in the acetone or the solvent probably. Um, so I'm using a little bit of the solvent and I'm just going to push that in. And by the way, I mentioned this earlier, like you have very little time to work. So clean these pins up ahead of time and make sure that they fit because hopefully I don't illustrate it here, but you've only got a couple of seconds to work once it starts to, and that was not a good thing I just did. So let me focus on this for a second. You only got a second or two before it's going to be welded into place. So it's really important that you work quick every time you get a part with acetone with solvent on it against another part of the same material because it's the solvent's going to evaporate really fast and the parts are going to bond really fast. Think like super glue speeds, right? And in this case, these aren't the strongest bonds, so you know you probably can get these apart if you work at it. If you absolutely had to with the pins, because this is really not a great weld we're doing here. We're just kind of tacking these together so that we can, that's probably too much time already. Yep, already in place. So the whole point is you want to end up with, hopefully you can see that on the camera, end up with a couple pins that stick up. This one I pushed in a little too far, but I went too far and I didn't realize it for a second. So it's there now. And it's fine. It's sticking up a little bit. It'll work. These aren't great joints, but they're absolutely clean. Because I didn't have any of that glue, there's no extra material. So when I put the other piece on, it's going to slide right in. It's going to fit nice and flush. And that's what we want here. We don't care that these pins aren't perfectly welded in place. When we do the full weld later, they'll be integrated into that. These are just to hold together well enough to align the parts when we do the weld later on. And that's all we're trying to do here. And by the way, these pins, you can go ahead and just do all your parts at the same time. Um, you know, get the pins and just be very careful to not put, pins on both sides of the joint, right? Because you only want them on one side. But you can do all your pins at the same time. Unlike the gluing, we're going to have to do those one joint at a time and let them dry. These we can do all at once. So just knock them out right at the beginning of your project. I noticed the focus wasn't good on the video earlier, so I'm hoping the focus is a little better here. I'm going to show you how to do one of these pins again. And, once again, it's just some pure acetone, a little on the pin, a little on the part, and then you're just going to drop it in. You only got a second or two to work, so that's it. And that's as much as you want to do. You just let this sit now. It takes about an hour or so for it to dry. I'm paranoid. I tend to give it more like 2, but to be fair, it's almost set now. An hour is probably absolutely plenty. You just need to sit and let it kind of acetone do its stuff, weld the plastic together, and then come back and then finish cleaning the pins up and testing the fit against the other part. So I'm going to let that set up now. We'll come back in a little bit to fit it to the adjoining part. Okay, so it's been about an hour now. and the acetone's evaporated off, and these pins have set in really good. Um, the other thing that I've done off camera that you want to make a point of doing is it's really important to do is you want to do whatever filing and cleanup you need to on the edges of these pins. And I'm not talking a lot. Just knock the edges down a little bit. What the important thing is, these parts have got to fit together without much fussing around. Okay, so I still have a little more work to fix, okay? As you can see, it's not quite going in. It's not too bad. So I will say too that they're going to get a little softer when we're working with them. So if it's a little tight, it's okay. But you really need to be able to drop it in place almost immediately without there being any hesitation or resistance, because you only have a couple seconds to work with the acetone covered parts because it starts evaporating and they bond really, really fast. So, like I said, I don't want to wait an hour or so. I usually wait about 2 for the pins to set. The other thing that I have found makes it a nice difference and works really well is I'll use an acetone wash on the parts that have just the holes in it, don't have the pins. So just basically plain acetone with nothing in it. And that's going to start making the plastic soft, um, and help it bond uh, with the other part. This part I'll use that glue that we made earlier, and it's been basically soaking while we've been working on the pins. What you really want to end up with, and I will say, I've done some gluing. The videos are a little. I've been doing other projects and other parts while this has been going on, but what you're really trying to do is you're trying to get like a wood glue like consistency. And this is starting to get a little thick. That's why I mentioned I've glued some other parts. Like as the day goes on, the stuff's going to harden. So, but the important thing is you want it to be like a wood glue kind of consistency. And that's why the online community's taken to calling this ABS glue, because that's kind of what it looks like. If you think about it, the prints are hopefully already dimensionally accurate. So we don't want any material to be left other than maybe in whatever microscopic holes are left. All this really is the plastic is making the acetone stick to the part a little bit and take a little longer to dry, so we get a little better weld. So we're not really trying to build up the material. This is literally just a delivery medium for the acetone, so the parts will weld together. It's basically a sacrificial material. So I'm going to have to work quick once I start doing this. I apologize if things go sideways. We'll have to deal with it as it's happening. Um, you only get a couple of seconds to go. You will need a new acetone brush for each one of these joints. Don't use your kids' craft brushes. They will melt in the solvent almost certainly. Uh, acid brushes are available in most hardware stores in the plumbing section. If you grab a random employee that isn't familiar with plumbing, they probably won't know what they are. But if you get the guy that usually works with plumbing, they'll know what you're talking about if you say acid brushes. Um, and these are, each time you do one of these joints, they're basically gonna be ruined. I mean, you could do a couple joints together right away, but 15 minutes after you start using it, the acetone is going to have evaporated, and this is going to be caked with bromide sick. So you only got a little while to work with it. The other thing that's important to do ahead of time is you want to have all your clamps ready to go, and you want to have already decided where you're going to put them, because once again, we only get a couple of seconds, and then you don't have any ability to affect the outcome. So we have to work really, really fast when we do this. So we're going to start with throwing the pure acetone on the side with the holes. And I do this because that way we don't have the glue dripping through the holes. So it's nice to just use the pure acetone where you don't get that plastic dripping through the holes into the rest of the part. You can tell I'm just about out of acetone in this little group. So you have to work pretty quick. You only get, it starts evaporating almost immediately, but you don't want to work like too quick, like not immediately, because you want some time for that acetone to loosen the plastic, to start melting into the plastic a little bit. Now, this is the pinned side, so we're going to use the ABS glue, the welding media, sacrificial media. And you're not really trying to get like a heavy coat, but you do want really good coverage. So you don't want it to be too heavy because it's just going to squeeze out and make a mess. But you got to get really good coverage over the whole part because anything that doesn't get this in there is going to have a weaker connection. So it's important to work quickly, but also really get it over the whole part as much as you can without leaving too much of a layer. And then immediately drop the part on. Hopefully your pins line up and it just drops into place without you having to think about it. And then throw your clamps on. And the other thing that's important to do here, don't like second guess. This is not the time to second guess yourself. Whatever it was you decided you were doing with these clamps, that's what you should do now. There's not time to mess with this and change your mind. You're better off with a good enough plan executed really quickly than the perfect plan that's a little too slow, because you just have seconds to work with this. The other thing you're going to want to make sure you're careful to do is close this ABS glue container as quick as you can, 'cause it's going to keep drying out. And that's about as much time as you get. That worked out pretty well, and that's about all the time I get. The other thing that is worth doing at this point, if you notice that it's squeezing out anywhere, this is going to be a lot the easiest time to pull that excess off, right? Because it's going to harden over time. So go ahead and wipe it down. But anyway, that's it. And now this takes longer to dry than the pins did because we're actually doing a proper weld here, and so it's going to take a little more time to dry than I'm actually kind of seeing how well this lined up. Um, so you're really gonna have to wait a couple hours for this before you take the clamps off. You know, after probably 2 or 3 hours, you can take the clamps off and you'll be able to handle this part. I would recommend being really gentle with it for at least 24 hours. Um, but it dries pretty fast. Even the 3 hour wait time is probably more than enough. I'm paranoid. So anyway, we'll come back and glue some more of these pieces together and see how the rest of the build goes. I'll come back and show you how it turned out. And that's basically the process, rinse and repeat. Now you can plan your project out a little bit to minimize how much time it's going to take overall. So in my case, I had the 6 pieces, so I could glue up 3 pairs at the same time. And then I'd have the 2 individual welds afterwards, right? Because you really don't want to be handling pieces that haven't dried yet. And it does take 2 or 3 hours before I would be confident handling them. And it takes probably a full day before it's like totally set, and you can kind of consider it a finished joint. But, your result at the end is, you get to where, hey, we've got one last set of clamps to pull off, right? And just grab your clamps and we went all the way to let's see, right, something like this, and just to give frame of reference for where we started, right? It was sections like this, so you know pretty incredible. Now you will see if you look real close. I don't know how well the camera's going to show that. Right, there is a little bit of like a sheen, where there's a little bit of liquid, right? So it's a little shinier. But once this is sanded, And I'll hopefully do a separate video on kind of refinishing this to make it ready for skinning. You're really not going to be able to see those joints, and they are, in my experience, if I did them well, these are actually stronger than the 3D printed layer lines. So they should be plenty strong enough. Also, you know, if you don't overdo it on the glue, you still have, like I some here, right? You still have your all your holes and stuff for your heat set inserts. One of the things I did, which maybe didn't make things any easier for me, is the same lines I split on is where I wanted deck mounting hardware. So I've got holes for inserts that were across these lines, and they're going to be fine. Just I didn't overdo it on the ABS glue, and it didn't fill the holes in, and they'll be absolutely fine. So hopefully this was helpful to you. I'm a member of Make Roanoke, if you haven't figured that out. Been wearing the shirt the whole time. If you happen to be in Southwest Virginia and you'd like to talk with me about these projects or see anything I'm doing in person, I would encourage you to chase me down at one of the live community meetings. I go to most of those. I can't promise to be at all of them. Reach out to me and ask. I'll happy to tell you if I'll be there. But I usually give an update on whatever project I'm working on at those, and try to get ideas and encouragement from the members there. So if you haven't heard of Make Roanoke and you're in the area, please look it up. It's a lot of fun. Bunch of creative people doing cool things. Hopefully that helps you. Thanks for watching, and until next time.